Welcome to Geek Cross, the podcast where faith and culture intersect. I am your host, Jeremy Yoder, and each episode we look at a topic related to pop culture or geekdom and have conversations that use science fiction, fantasy, gaming, or comic books as a jumping off point to talk about deeper issues and wrestle with the big questions of life. In this episode, we are going to go out of science fiction and into science fact. My guest today is Erik Lundin. And Erik, welcome to the show. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, thank you, Jeremy. This is sounds like a wonderful podcast. I am a lawyer with NASA. I work out of the Armstrong Flight Research Center. That's located on Edwards Air Force Base in the high desert, just about 90 miles north of LA.
And what do you do as an aerospace lawyer?
So, aerospace law is kind of a misnomer in a sense. Specifically, as a government lawyer, I do what most government lawyers do, which is handle federal procurement, purchasing goods and services for the government, ethics regulations, government ethics, and a variety of other specific government laws. But space law generally it encompasses a lot of things. It encompasses international law. It's very expensive and difficult to get to space, so it requires a lot of international cooperation. We currently purchase. The United States currently purchases rides to the International Space Station through Russia, among other things. And so there's that aspect. And back in 1968, when this really became a big thing, there's something called the Outer Space Treaty, which is a very international, aspirational document that some would argue doesn't really apply anymore, because today we have very complex commercial contracts in the private sector that deals with all sorts of things like liability and everything else as when it comes to satellites. So there's aerospace law really isn't an area of law as so much. It's a subject matter in which various aspects of the law cover.
Interesting. Is aerospace law what you were expecting when you became a lawyer?
Not really. I mean, possibly in a way. I mean, I went to the University of Mississippi's law school because they had the only at the time they had the only JD law degree that specialized in aviation and aerospace, and that was something a field I was interested in possibly entering. So I really didn't know what I was getting myself into when I went to law school. So you don't really have something to compare it to. What inspired you to do this? To go to law school?
No, to go into aerospace law. I guess here we need to give a little bit of background. So Erik and I do know each other from a ways back. We used to both work in the same horrible office, and in Baltimore, and we got to know each other there. Asking about your interest and your goal of going into aerospace law. So what inspired that?
Okay, well that's I've always really been interested in space generally. I mean, the subject of your podcast is science fiction and other things, geekdom, so to speak, and I've always kind of been interested in that. And so when I was an undergrad, I had an opportunity at NYU to develop my own major, and I ended up gravitating towards the history and philosophy of science. And then once you get a degree in history or philosophy, there's not much to do with it unless you want to teach or go to law school. So I thought one day, I was like, you know what, space law, that's got to be a thing. And so I looked it up and started researching it, and I found out that it is actually a thing. I mean, at the time, it wasn't really. It still is a kind of amorphous thing. As I said earlier, there's a lot of various aspects and areas of law, and I don't think any one person is a true space lawyer. But there's that's what led me to the University of Mississippi, and I kind of kept with it, and I had a great opportunity to intern with NASA, and then it turned into a full-time position, and I really enjoy it. It's a really great place to work.
What is it about the job that you love so much?
The people, I tell you, working with engineers, they are a very passionate bunch, and it makes you passionate, and you'll stop any of these guys, and they will ask them any question you want, and they will talk to you until you're blue in the face, until they're blue in the face, and just let you know everything about it, and it's infectious. It really it's something that makes you want to work harder, and I enjoy the goal of I guess you could say it's a working towards human progress.
So you feel like you're on the edge of sort of science and of development and of technology because of this work that you do.
Yes, and in a certain way. I mean, there's quite a few people out there that think the government's full of waste, and at times I would say that I can see where they're coming from, and it's but at the same time, NASA and along with NOAA and other agencies like that, their goal.
What's NOAA?
NOAA,
just for those of us who...
NOAA is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They do weather, sometimes space weather. They look at climate change, stuff like that.
Okay.
And NASA and NOAA, their missions kind of overlap a little bit. And largely what NASA and NOAA do is that they have what's called a statutory mission or objective to, for example, NASA is to advance science through space and aviation, among other things. There's a whole list of objectives of NASA, and NOAA has comparable tasks. And what we do is make sure that we are able to that NASA is able to I guess take the risks and challenges and go after things that the commercial sector isn't able to. And that's go ahead.
So speaking of the commercial sector, that's kind of sort of blown up in the last 10 years or so, with Virgin Space and the SpaceX and some of those projects. How do you see the privatization, the commercial space program, if you can call it that,
right,
efforts? How do they impact sort of your job, or will they have impact on some of these statutes about aerospace?
Well, absolutely, and I mean, SpaceX is a direct result of commercialization being written into the statutes and the directives that Congress gave NASA all the way back to 1988. I think there's something called the Commercialization of Space Act or something to that effect, and that basically dictated NASA to spur the commercial sector. And you'll find that throughout NASA appropriations, as well as authorizations from Congress directing every 2 or 4 years, directing NASA to do those sorts of things. And we're supposed to spur the commercial sector where it's possible, and we're not supposed to compete with the commercial sector either. We're not supposed to do anything the commercial sector is able to do by itself. So you can see, and granted, it took 30-something years to get SpaceX up and running, but they are doing very well right now. They're able to, they're really doing cutting-edge things, which was the goal.
I mean, it's interesting to have this conversation and to think of ways and the law, because when you look at science fiction in general, there aren't any lawyers. You don't think about the team of lawyers, of Federation lawyers that are supporting, the mission of the Enterprise. It's all about those who are actually there. And so this is a topic that I have never really thought about a great deal, and I think most people haven't thought about.
It's true. Although I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no money in the Federation, so I think lawyers are obsolete.
It is a kind of a quasi-socialist communist utopia, yes.
Yes, but no, it is. We people joke all the time about lawyers and everything else, and we're there to just our job is to make sure that NASA can go ahead and do its mission, and we can do it within the bounds of federal law, and that's kind of our goal. So if something goes wrong, or there's a protest from another commercial company saying we didn't have full and open competition or something else, we're there to make sure it's done right. So we kind of steer the ship in that way.
Okay. So how does working in this field and working in space impact, since this is a theology podcast, impact your view of God and your view of the spiritual? Does that have any impact on that?
I mean, yes, of course. I have to say that as far as faith goes, I'm still on a journey searching for faith. It's what drove me to study the history and philosophy of science. Brought me all the way. Yeah, I was very kind of lost as far as religion goes, and almost swore it off when I was younger. And went after.
What background?
Go ahead.
From?
Oh,
what kind of church background did you come from?
I was both my parents are Lutheran. I was confirmed Lutheran, and when I was very, very young, to be quite honest, both my grandfathers had passed away 2 weeks from each other, unrelated, and that kind of threw me for a loop, and I wasn't getting. No one was answering my questions, I guess, and they all said that he's in a better place, they're in a better place, and that didn't satisfy me, and no one was really, I guess, really giving me the kind of attention or talk with me that I really needed and wanted. And I've at that point on, I had a really hard time with religion and God, and because of that, I turned to science because I felt science had a really had a good process. It had a good way of testing and figuring out and explaining the world. And so
you felt. Go ahead.
No. Well, because of that, I went to I went to a program that allowed me to develop my own study. I was very interested in the history and philosophy of science, and actually, I did we had to do something called a colloquium in order to graduate. It was basically a mini undergrad version of a dissertation, oral dissertation, and I did it on full science and religion. And through that study of reading, texts from all over, from ancient texts all the way up to modern texts, and exploring the idea, it kind of has this amazing synergy, or science and religion, I believe, can coexist very beautifully. I think they seek the same things through different routes. And with that being said, I'm still in search.
So what, in terms of then faith, I mean, for what you said, it sounds like that when your grandfathers died and you kind of got an answer that seemed kind of cheap, they're in a better place. That's kind of a dismissive answer. Here's an answer, so that you can stop asking these uncomfortable questions that we have no answer for.
Yes.
It sounds like that science and its kind of its process of observation helped then answer some other questions. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes, absolutely.
So what kind of questions do you think that science cannot answer?
Well, I think science. Well, I mean, all right. So, a very, very basic, my basic understanding, and again, I could be wrong. I mean, I'm no expert in these fields, but I think science is a very it's empirical, it's objective. You have to test and test and test a theory and get the same results in order for something to be accepted as the way the world works from a mechanical point of view. And religion is more subjective. It's more metaphysical, and it explains things that I guess through faith in a sense. But ironically, we have faith in our theories. I mean, science is all man-made because of our observations in the world, and I think, in a way, religion drives science. We seek what religion is able to explain that we don't know. Science seeks to answer, but there's always something else. There's always an in-between. There's always something else out there that we can't quite understand. And I think that there is religion in that. There is faith in that. There's faith that there's something beyond what we have now, because we exist. And yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I've observed about sort of science and faith is that, none of us, science is very good at understanding how the system works, how the systems of the universe operate in a mechanical sense.
Right.
What science can't do is step outside that system and to view that system objectively from the outside. We're all kind of bound to this sort of moment in history and this moment in time and place, and we can't step outside of that. And I think is what can exist outside of that system. Yeah, go ahead.
No, absolutely, and I think you see that through history, and the reason is traditionally science and religion are I guess historically are I don't want to say enemies, but they contrast, is because there was at some point, I mean, take Galileo for instance. At some point, there was the Earth was the center of the universe, or the Earth was universe was perfect, and the Earth was in the middle of it. And then he noticed moons around Jupiter and craters on the moon, and all of a sudden that was imperfect. And then Copernicus found that we might not be the center of the universe. We might revolve around the sun, and these things kind of shattered the worldview at that time,
right?
And it made us, and so we have similar experiences in recent history with, and they're less dramatic, but we have Newtonian physics and Einsteinian physics. I mean, Newtonian physics isn't perfect, but it explained the world very well and allowed us to do amazing things with trains and cars and everything else. But then there were some things that it couldn't prove.
Right.
One of which being, I think, the transit of Mercury in front of the sun or something like that, maybe Venus. And Einstein was able to figure that out, and so his physics was kind of different, and it allowed for many different things. And that's what Thomas Kuhn, the philosopher of science, described as a paradigm shift. And I think we have these paradigm shifts, and I think that when a paradigm shift occurs, that is literally the objective perspective that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't happen often, and I guess you can call it ironic, if not, but it shakes the faith of science. It shakes the foundation of everything we've built on with our empirical world. We have to build it up again.
Well, now we're moving into something called like string theory, right? Which is not exactly Einsteinian physics either, right? It moves beyond that to something new to explain phenomena that we don't understand yet. Right. Correct? Is that the next sort of edge here?
Well, not really. And from what I understand, it is the next edge. I mean, string theory or the unified field theory, as I understand it. And again, I'm just a lowly lawyer here, but it's there's quantum physics that explains the very very, 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 very small atomical world, electrons, protons, quarks, muons, all those things. And we're able to explain the world, and it's built on probabilities and very non-finite things, but enough to really allow us to manipulate that stuff. And then there's, again, Newtonian / Einsteinian physics, which is macrophysics, which explains the world of falling apples off of trees and airplanes. And they both work perfectly in their own world. But if you apply the principles of macrophysics to quantum physics, or the other way around, it doesn't work. It completely falls apart. So we have these two physical, scientific frameworks that work perfectly in their world, and they explain things. And one makes cell phones and you know, the fact that I'm talking to you on an iPad through the internet happen, and then there's one that makes planes fly. Mm-hmm. And then so the theory is that there's one theory that explains one subject or whatever that explains all of this together, and that's what string theory tries to do. String theory tries to connect those.
That's very interesting. I mean, one thing that strikes me, what you were just talking about, too, going back to your points about Copernicus and Galileo, it seems to me that one of the gifts of science, or troubling things about science, is that over the last 1,000 years, it has shown us how small we are. You know, that we move from understanding ourselves as being the center of the universe to being just a microscopic speck in an infinite universe.
Right.
And I think that, you know, that can be kind of a scary thought. That can also, I think, be very inspiring, and there's something, I think, very spiritual about seeing ourselves as a tiny, tiny part of this infinite wholeness.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what Carl Sagan called the pale blue dot. And I think Voyager 2 was a spacecraft, which also, I believe, is a spacecraft in Star Trek 1, the first movie, but we won't get there. It
was Voyager was turned into some sort of sentient computer.
Yeah, it came back to us as V'ger.
Yes, it's V'ger.
But anyway, I think Voyager 2, I believe it was Voyager 2, it might have been one of the other early spacecraft, but when it passed Venus, or it got pretty far out there, and it was thought to be at that time on its last leg, Carl Sagan was, I don't know if it was mission manager or something at that point, but he said, why don't you turn it around and take a picture of Earth? And he turned around and he took a picture of Earth, and it's this really tiny, faint, blurry blue dot. And he called it the pale blue dot, and he wrote a whole book about it. And it's really really interesting. I mean, the first time we saw the moon rise over the moon from one of the first Apollo missions, and it's a humbling experience. It's scary, I think it is, and I think you can take two things out of this. You can take a nihilistic approach where, you know, we're all alone in the universe, or you could take the approach that I mean, for life to be on Earth is pretty amazing. It had to be the perfect circumstance, the perfect distance away. We had to have water. We had to have an atmosphere. We had to, you know, survive multiple meteor impacts that easily could have wiped out life on Earth, and all these things. I mean, life on Earth really, truly is a miracle. I mean, we can go back and talk about evolution, and we can talk about primordial ooze, or where they all began. But I mean, I think one word sums it up, and it's a miracle. And I think you would do yourself and humanity injustice if you weren't awestruck by that fact.
Mm-hmm. So where do you then end up in this? I mean, do you end up feeling like we're alone in the universe, or do you end up with this, you know, this is a miracle? What's your thinking about that these days?
I mean, who knows? Who knows if we are alone in the universe? What was the line from Contact, another Sagan book? You know, we'd be an awful lonely place. We were alone. With how vast the universe is turning out to really be. I think I think that's coming back to the faith thing. I think there's times in my life where, especially in nature, I'm kind of blindsided, and all of a sudden I just kind of stop, and time seems to stop, and I just kind of am able to absorb the awesomeness that is life in general. And I think that's where I am. I think I appreciate it, and I'm amazed. And whether we're alone or not, I still think it's a miracle.
Do you then see as God having an active part of this miracle, of God, you know, stepping into history and making sure that humanity works, or is God a force, or is God, distant? I mean, how does a view of God fit within this?
It's a developing thing, but I believe, for me, I think God is more like, Aristotle's prime mover, in the sense that he was the beginning and the end, and I think he may have started all. And is it an individual? I mean, that's what we're able to put stuff towards, or our perspective. But I really believe it's more of a force. What that force is, I don't know. I mean, I don't have those answers, but I believe, I do not believe that there's everyday interaction and interference, so to speak. I think, but I do believe that we are all here because of this awesome being or force.
That's interesting. I mean, I think part of what, Christianity argues, particularly Pentecostal Christianity argues, is that is that God exists, God is creator of the entire universe, and wants to have a personal relationship with you. That it is possible to have, through Jesus Christ, a personal, a one-on-one relationship with the divine. And what you're describing doesn't sound like that. It sounds a little more deistic, more watchmaker goddish. That God created the universe, perhaps, but now has stepped back outside and allows the system just to run on its own, like a watch. Am I understanding you correctly?
Absolutely, and I mean, and that was a theological point of view for quite some time, and that has, I think, directly to do with the scientific revolution when you think about it in that way. And I don't believe that. I believe that we are very lucky and blessed to be where we are in the world, and I think it'd be remiss of us if we did not take the time to appreciate that and appreciate each other and every living thing that's on Earth. Mm-hmm. And do all we can to, I mean, we have this, some would argue not, but I believe we have this imperative to procreate and live on forever, and that we do that in a sense in family and things we create and everything else. But I think that we have a great responsibility as humans. We're able to understand this amazing gift that we have, and I think it behooves us to acknowledge and give thanks to whatever force or person or thing created us. And I think it's a very strong foundation that guides us in this world. I mean, I think it really speaks to treat everyone as equals and help those that can't help themselves, and really, and it gives these overall, universal principles that you find in both philosophy and religion, a lot of strength and a lot of great foundation.
In what ways do you see that conflict between faith, as you're describing it, and the work that you do and science? Is there ever a conflict? Do these things always work together, or do you find yourself within ethical situations where the science and the faith may conflict with each other? Is that a really difficult question? Should I rephrase it?
No, I mean, it's not a difficult question. But it is a difficult question at the same time. It's there again. I am ongoing with finding faith and searching for it. And I think it makes everything you do in life difficult. because you want to. I envision myself being a certain person that is always good and just, and it's hard to do that in both the professional and personal life. And there's things I want to aspire to, and I'm falling tremendously short in that currently. But I'm actively working to get better, and I think what's driving me is this worldview that I've spoken with you about today. And it's it's a difficult thing. I mean, there are times where I may feel ethically conflicted about some things, and there's times that I don't. But I did, and the reverse side is, I took an oath to serve the public, and I take that oath seriously. It's an oath that I swore to take, and I think it's that's what drives me currently.
So, in the framework that you're describing, is there such a thing as sin? I mean, is there possible to sin, to rebel against God, to mess up? Does that exist in the framework, or is sin a concept that you really don't have much to do with, as you kind of are thinking about these ethical issues?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think again, if you go back and you take what I was kind of describing before as this world that we have a lot of responsibility in this world, and again, I fall short, and I think that's sin in times. It's there might have been a person that I felt I could have helped and I didn't, and I had the opportunity to, and there was no really good reason for me not to. And I feel like that in a sense could be interpreted as sin in a way.
Well, one of the things that's interesting is that the Greek word for sin, which honestly right now completely escapes me, but the meaning of the Greek word of sin is missing the mark, in a sense of a target and shooting an arrow, and missing the mark.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and so sin in the New Testament, as being described by Paul and those writing in Greek, there is a sense of when people sort of fall short or miss the mark, there's something about what they're called to do and how they're called to be that they have failed to do. And I think that's kind of what you're describing here is when we fail to honor our relationships with other people, we are missing the mark, and we are sinning when we're not in right relationship with each other.
Absolutely. I would agree with that 100%.
Good. Okay, well, we're not fighting, so that's good.
I would absolutely agree with that. That's a very and we have different there's different forces that affect us this day and age. I mean, and I admire you in the sense that you took a great courage and bravery to just kind of like go and really follow your faith and become go to seminary. And I think it's tough. And then I'm in a position where I'm starting a family, and it's hard to give up a good job at this time in my life, about to have a child, and and pursue something a little more spiritually calling, so to speak. And I think that happens to all of us in this world. And when I see someone that's able to sacrifice so much or put themselves out there and really do what their heart is telling them to do, I think it's amazing.
I appreciate you saying that. It is right now an incredibly, I think, challenging and interesting time to be in pastoral ministry, in a sense that we're at a moment in history where the Christian church is losing its power and it's losing influence and it's moving to the margins. And, in my experience, the infrastructure of church is falling apart, and that's an incredibly scary thing to have to go through. It's an incredibly painful thing to go through. I also believe in new life, and I believe that there is a new form of church that is emerging, a new set of kind of relationships, maybe that is more faithful to what God and what the Scriptures and what Jesus calls us to than the institutional church that's we've had for the last 500 years or so. And And yeah, it is challenging sometimes. Sometimes I have to confess, Eric, I wonder why God did not call me to be an investment banker or a hedge fund manager or something that is a little more, monetarily rewarded. It is
Well, I mean, if you would have become the head of HSBC at the time of the financial collapse and brought all the money to churches and the poor, you might be more celebrated than they are now. Or you might have been prosecuted and actually put in jail, but that's a different story.
That is. It is, and so I think it's important for us in the church to have conversation and dialogue with science and with modernity, and understand the world that we are in the context that we're in. I
Absolutely.
think one of the problems that many churches now have, and one of the reasons why youth are rejecting the church, is that we no longer understand the culture. We're no longer the ones who are driving culture. We're no longer the primary source of meaning in the culture. And now there are other voices that are giving meaning, that tell us who we are and what it is important in life and what it means to be happy and fulfilled. And we are just one voice in the noise, and it is incredibly difficult, I think, to be heard and for people to take you seriously.
Absolutely. And I think I think though that spirituality and religion, just like science, and again, I think they're very complementary in that sense. It's a common denominator. No matter what happens, we are, and there's been ebbs and flows with the power of religion in the history of humankind. And I think you have, granted, we might be lower than we have been in the past with religion, but I think it's a returning point when all the dust settles from this crazy new technology-filled world we're in. Religion's always there, I think there will be, as you said, like a return and a new growth at some point.
Well, one thing that's really interesting is, one of the things I've read is that, we're in a 500-year change right now, this change, this shift in culture. 500 years ago was the Reformation, which was also a massive shift in relationship between state and culture and the church, when you had all this part of the Catholic Church break off and begin Protestantism, which, interesting enough, was also technology-driven.
Yeah.
The printing press.
Absolutely. Mr. Gutenberg.
Creation, the Gutenberg Bible, right. The creation of people would write these flyers, and they would print them out, and they would distribute them, and things went viral in the way that it does with the internet. These ideas, yeah. What Martin Luther went viral when he protested in Wittenberg, and so there are parallels right now to the Reformation of what we're going through. Massive sort of technological change, a fundamental change in how we understand the world, political conflict, religious conflict, social conflict. We're experiencing many of the same kinds of dynamics that were going on in the Reformation.
I guess, absolutely. And that's really interesting you said that. Yeah, I guess you could look at the printing press not only being comparable to the internet, but I mean that also the big thing with the Reformation, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the fact that the Bible was now printed in English and other languages.
Well, originally German. The first non-Latin Bible, was in German.
Right.
English got translated later on. When the Church of... Well, no, it was later on. It was King James. I believe it was King James. The King James Bible was the first proper English translation of the Bible.
So at that point, everyone, the people that could read at that time, were able to read the words themselves and interpret them for themselves.
They were, and that caused a lot of chaos. There was the German Peasants' Rebellion, and where people took Luther's ideas about church and theology and they applied it to politics, and they applied it to social order, and were rebelling against the German princes. There was the Anabaptist rebellion at Munster, where they took over the city and established a polygamous sort of theocracy until they were destroyed. And so there was a lot of conflict coming out of this technological change that led to this theological break that led to political conflict. And I think, the world right now is in the process of reordering itself. I think the internet has opened up an impressive amount of possibility when it comes to communicating with one another, but it also has made us more isolated than ever as well.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's something that, gosh, where do you start with that? I mean, you have the Edward Snowden leaks and with government, and then you have China and North Korea that are firewalled from the rest of the world, and then you have terrorism that is fueling all through the internet, and then meanwhile you have people that and this is something that really affects me, not on a professional personal level, but it's the fact that there's so much hate on the internet. There's so much hate in personal comments and on the news articles and everything else. And I think people feel like the anonymity behind a screen, and it's scary to me that all this hate is boiling up. And you're right, we live in a very chaotic time, and it's going to be interesting to see if it even happens in our lifetime, what the climax is, and then what the result is after the dust settles.
So in the midst of all that, where do you hold on to hope? What gives you hope in the times of chaos?
I'm going to come back to it. I think science, and again, this is why I love working at NASA, because we're looking outward, and we're looking at and we're looking at the unknown and trying to figure out those questions. I mean, there's parts of NASA, like the Kepler project is looking at exoplanets they've already narrowed down a few that they might look into a little further that might be able to support similar life to ours. We have Mars and climate change and the sun and exploring all the moons. I think that's hope to me. Mm-hmm. That's hope that through this exploration, there's again the thing that I expressed earlier is that how can you not take all this in that we see in the world and just not think it's amazing and there's something more powerful out there, and for us to be bickering over what might seem like very, very big deals, regardless, with in the microcosm that is a country or a few religions or Earth in general, seems minuscule and pointless. And we have a greater calling, and that's to, I don't know, I mean, it might sound kind of hippie here, but to cherish this Earth, this one place we have to live, and I don't know. That's kind of where I stand, and I get hope out of that. It also makes me feel hopeless at the same time, because I don't have the tools to make that happen anytime soon. But
you're playing a small part in all this, but you don't have the power or the authority to really make it happen.
Absolutely. And I do find solace in that. I mean, at times. So.
Okay. Well, Erik, we haven't quite done an hour. We're a little bit short of an hour. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, there isn't. Thank you so much for asking me to be on your podcast. I think this is a fantastic idea, and I hope I did a good job.
Well, I think you did a great job. It's very thought-provocative. It's nice to know that lawyers think more than the liability of the Death Star.
Well, I mean, we can get into that if you'd like.
Yeah, let's get into that. Why don't we get into the liability of the Death Star? Yeah.
Well, there's the Outer Space Treaty, which requires everyone to treat the theory of the commons is the basis of the Outer Space Treaty. So we all have a right to equal share to the spoils of the universe, so to speak. So no country can own anything in space for now.
For now.
Until the evil empire comes along. So
you would say that the Death Star blowing up Alderaan would probably be, a violation of some treaty somewhere.
Possibly, or it'd be like a misdemeanor in galactic criminal law. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so and let me ask you this: the fact that Luke Skywalker is able to destroy the Death Star by shooting into this little porthole, that sounds to me like a major design flaw. Where were the lawyers looking over the specs as this was built and pointing out that this was a design flaw?
Well, I will tell you that it might have been a lack of oversight from the lawyers looking at those construction contracts, but I think what happened is there wasn't enough lawyers available to catch that flaw.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, very good. It's good to know that the evil empire's Achilles' heel is a lack of lawyers.
Yes, and so remember that next time a lawyer calls you.
Well, Erik, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a really thought-provoking discussion. If you like Geek Cross, please help us out and leave a review on iTunes. You can find Geek Cross on Facebook and Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @GeekCrossShow. You can email us at geekcrossshow@gmail.com. Geek Cross is a McLaren production. My name is Jeremy Yoder. Thanks for listening.